They said war was about plans, lines on maps, speeches, and orders. But plans don't fire shells. Machines do. And when the machines stop, so does everything else. This is the story of one that didn't, of a tank that should have failed, and of a mechanic who refused to let it. His name never made the papers. He didn't lead men, he repaired them through steel, oil, and stubbornness. He wasn't a hero. He was the reason heroes lived long enough to be remembered. Winter 1944. Somewhere in the frozen gray between Belgium and France, the Sherman tank was America's mechanical gospel, built in Detroit, shipped by the thousands, each one a sermon in steel about quantity as quality. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the best, but it was enough. While the Germans built masterpieces, machines that demanded respect, precision, and endless maintenance, the Americans built persistence. The Sherman's secret was not its gun or its armor. It was the simplicity of its repair. You could strip it, weld it, replace it, patch it, all in the field, all without asking anyone's permission. It was a soldier's machine, and Harold Jennings was its doctor. Before the war, Harold fixed tractors in Illinois, machines that had no manuals, only problems that needed solving. He could tell an engine's story by the sound of its cough. He could fix it with whatever the earth provided, wire, wood, a nail, a prayer. When the draft came, the Army didn't give him a rifle, they gave him a wrench. His job was to keep things moving, to turn the chaos of mud, cold, and exhaustion into motion. But motion is fragile, and in 1944, so was the Sherman's ammunition feed. Inside the turret, everything depended on rhythm. The loader passed the shell, the gunner locked, the commander gave the word, and the belt carried the next round into the chamber. When it jammed, and it often did, seconds turned to eternity. The gunner's eyes froze on the enemy, the commander shouted, and the tank became a coffin waiting for its lid. Harold hated that sound, the metallic choke of failure. He'd heard it too many times, so he decided to do something about it, not for glory, not for orders, simply because it was stupid, and he couldn't stand stupid things. Every night after maintenance hours, he stayed behind in the supply tent. The others drank coffee, played cards. He worked under a single lamp, a circle of light surrounded by cold and quiet. He dismantled the feed belt piece by piece, laid it out across the dirt floor like a map of frustration. Then he began to redesign it. He cut the links shorter, reinforced the joints with hinges from an aircraft crate. He widened the loops by a millimeter, enough to prevent bending without losing tension. He scavenged a spring from a broken Jeep starter, filed the burrs smooth with his pocket knife, and wound it into the system until it sang. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't sanctioned, but it worked. When his commanding officer found him one night, bent over the machine, he laughed. "Jennings," he said, "you think you're smarter than Detroit." Harold didn't look up. He just kept working. "Detroit's not here," he said. "I am." The morning came gray and frozen, the kind of cold that bit through everything except adrenaline. The men of Jennings' battalion climbed into their Shermans, breath fogging the steel air, the smell of fuel mixing with frost. Orders came down through static and shouting, "Advance toward a ridge somewhere between France and eternity." The ground was already shaking. Artillery in the distance, tanks rumbling, the rhythm of industry turned to violence. No one asked where they were going. In war, direction is just another word for obedience. Harold checked the engine one last time, ran a gloved hand over the new feed belt, and muttered, "Don't you dare stop." The convoy moved out. They crawled through mud and snow, Shermans belching smoke like angry locomotives. Each turn of the tread sounded like defiance. In the turret, the gunner whistled quietly, a song Harold didn't recognize. The road curved through skeletal trees and ended at a ridge that was more suggestion than geography. Someone called it Hill 43. Someone else called it a bad idea. Before they even reached halfway, the first shells arrived, German 88s screaming with mathematical precision. The explosions were so clean they almost felt engineered. The lead tank vanished in flame. The second lost a tread. The column hesitated. Then instinct, that ancient mechanical command, pushed them forward again. Jennings' Sherman lurched into a shallow depression, half cover, half trap. The gunner called targets. The commander barked. The loader slammed round after round into the chamber. For a few moments it worked, the rhythm of survival. Then, click, the belt jammed. The belt cooled to a darker color. Heat-tempered, story-tempered. Someone photographed it in the evening light. More out of curiosity than reverence. In the frame, the metal looks ordinary. It isn't. It's the outline of an idea that function is a form of courage. Word moved the way. News always moves in an army. Sideways, not upward. Crewmen told crewmen. Mechanics told mechanics. Someone said, "Guy in 3rd Platoon built a feed that doesn't jam." Someone else said, "From junk, from everything." By the time the story reached the battalion workshop, it had already grown a myth. A belt made of aircraft hinges, a spring scavenged from a jeep, a loader who fed shells by braille while the world ended outside. Details shifted. The truth didn't. The tank kept firing. The next week, 3 more belts appeared. Cousins of Harold's first, not twins. Each carried the fingerprints of its maker. One with links shaved thinner to flex in the cold. One with bushings cut from canteens to absorb shock. One with a braided steel safety line to retrieve a jam without opening a hatch under fire. None were regulation. All were reality. In supply sheds, men traded parts like gamblers trade tips. Try piano wire for the return spring. Use a horseshoe nail to pin the hinge. Cut the curve here. It wants to ride high when the turret's at 40 degrees. It became a kind of oral tradition. Craft transmitted at the speed of necessity. The manuals were silent. The field was not. Somewhere a clerk stamped requisitions for MISC. Springs 5/16. Somewhere else, a captain approved an extra allotment of hacksaw blades. The army, without meaning to, funded its own heresy. In a warm office far from the front, an engineer unfolded a smudged sketch. The lines were uneven. The dimensions guessed. The annotations half grease, half grammar. But the idea was clean. Widen the loop. Relieve the pinch. Turn the belt into a hinge rather than a link. He looked up at the production floor. Sheets of steel moving like language. Riveters singing in hard rhythm. A city of motion trying to speak fluently to a battlefield an ocean away. He'd been told the request came from field reports indicating recurrent stoppages. He hadn't been told it came from a mechanic under a lamp, using a pocket knife to teach a weapon humility. The engineer ran his thumb along the drawing's crude arc, felt the intelligence inside the irregularity. Then he did the most radical thing a designer can do. He listened. He drafted a formal version. Radii exact, tolerances set, metallurgy specified. He sent it up the chain with the safe bureaucratic sentence, incorporating field-proven modification to increase feed reliability under adverse conditions. The language was dry. The translation was not. A soldier solved this. We should copy him. And so a line in a factory began to bend around the contour of an unnamed man's stubbornness. In the months that followed, crews who ran the new belts developed a ritual. At first light, pull, flex, feel, midday, wipe, oil, test, night, inspect, whisper to the steel. As if it could hear, they discovered what Harold already knew, that reliability is not a property, it's a relationship. You keep a thing alive by paying attention to its small complaints. You listen for the mispronounced syllable in its rhythm and correct it before it becomes a sentence of silence. They learn to read the feed by sound, to tell the difference between an honorable rattle and a dangerous one, to foresee the jam the way a farmer foresees weather, not by numbers, by intimacy. And on the days when the belt ran like a rumor of perfection, they felt something no manual can promise, trust. In a canvas roll, wrapped against oil and rain, Harold kept a single sheet of paper, a list of dimensions scribbled next to a sketch that didn't quite agree with itself. He had meant to write a letter with it, to an engineer in some distant office, to a company whose name he associated with the smell of factories and home. The letter began 3 times and never ended once. Sir, I found that if you widen the loop, to whom it may concern, we're dying from a small thing here, Detroit, please listen. He folded it again, not out of defeat, out of the conviction that the work itself was the letter. If the idea mattered, the machine would carry it where it needed to go. It did. In peacetime, we say innovation is creativity. In war, innovation is duty, the refusal to let predictability kill the predictable. Harold's belt taught 3 lessons that outlived the ridge. Observe without ego. The world is telling you what's wrong. Believe it. Repair before redesign. Perfection can wait. Survival cannot. Codify the ugly truth. If the hack works, make it policy. Don't let beauty veto function. Those rules are older than factories and newer than software. They are the ethics of keeping civilization running under load. Years later, a museum acquired the turret of a Sherman recovered from a hedgerow. The curator found a feed belt in a crate of mixed parts. It was not standard. He nearly threw it away. Something, a line filed by hand, a hinge too honest to be factory, stopped him. He tagged it Field Modified Feed Assembly, origin unknown. Visitors walk past it every day. They linger by the armor plates, the gun barrel, the famous silhouette. They rarely look down at the belt, but once an old man did. He leaned in close, traced the edge of the hinge with a fingertip gone unsteady with time, and smiled the way people smile at their own handwriting. He said nothing. He moved on. The commander cursed. The gunner hit the feed lever. Nothing. The turret filled with smoke and shouting. Jennings moved without thinking, like a man fixing a problem, not fighting a war. He shoved past the loader, popped the hatch, and climbed into the noise. Wind and gunfire slapped him across the face. He ripped open the jammed feed and saw the damage. One bent link, one cracked spring, the same old curse of bad design. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the damaged belt free, tossed it aside, and grabbed his own, the farm boy contraption. Everyone had laughed at. He locked it in. The metal clicked. He hit the release lever. The belt moved, smooth, perfect, seamless. Try it now, he shouted. The gunner squeezed the trigger. The 75mm cannon fired. Then again, and again. The rhythm returned. The tank was alive. For the next 4 hours, they fought. 4 hours of firing, reloading, repositioning, firing again. 4 hours in which one tank held a ridge it had no right to hold. Jennings' hands bled. The gun overheated. The barrel warped, but the belt, his belt, didn't stop. Every link moved with the precision of faith. Every round slid into the chamber like a heartbeat refusing to quit. Smoke filled the valley. The ground turned black with oil and ash. By dusk, the guns on the ridge had fallen silent, not in surrender, but in exhaustion. When the Germans finally withdrew, they left behind more twisted steel than men. The Sherman sat smoking, its paint scorched, its crew half deaf and wholly alive. Jennings stared at the gun, watched the belt still moving as it cooled, and said quietly, "Good girl." When reinforcements arrived, the commander climbed up onto the tank. He looked down through the hatch at the mechanic who had refused to die by design. "Jennings," he said, "you built that thing. Built it, fixed it, used it." Harold answered, "You'll get a medal for this." He didn't. The battle report listed improvised field modifications as the reason for the tank's sustained fire. No name attached, no glory assigned. But the engineers who inspected the wreck afterward couldn't stop talking about the feed system. They called it crude, unsanctioned, and flawless. One of them wrote a quiet note to Detroit, "Recommend testing on future production models. Field results indicate significant improvement in feed reliability." The note traveled through supply channels, then up the ladder of anonymity, until someone somewhere stamped it approved. The design was replicated, adjusted, standardized, and Harold Jennings never knew. A belt jams for reasons that make sense, only to those who live with them. Cold contracts, a link by half a hair. Mud adds its own geometry. Recoil climbs where it shouldn't, and stress, that invisible accomplice, changes the shape of everything in small, lethal ways. Harold's fix did not make the world cleaner. It made the belt cleverer. It gave every link room to fail gracefully and recover. It translated chaos into yield, impact into articulation, shock into swing. The difference was not in theory. It was in forgiveness. The belt did not demand a perfect world. It endured the world it got. That is the signature of real engineering, not the removal of failure, but the accommodation of it. You cannot put a lamplit contraption into a manual without sanitizing it. So when the modification finally arrived in typed paragraphs and black and white diagrams, it no longer mentioned knives or aircraft crates or the heat of fear. It became a checklist: mill link to spec, install flexible bushing, replace return spring with revised part No 27B, test feed at -10 degrees Celsius, log results. And in becoming official, it lost its biography, but kept its soul. Units trained on the new belt and called it the improved assembly. Crews who'd never seen the original called it the way it should have been. They were right, but should is a word that arrives only after must has suffered. War does not revere artisans. It uses them and moves on. But every army depends on them, the practical poets who make machines do what they were never quite designed to do. You can map a campaign by these distortions: field-welded tow hooks, fenders hammered into armor, radio sets rewired with a coin and a prayer, and now belts that would not break. Each hack is a footnote to a doctrine written elsewhere. Together they are the unwritten doctrine that actually wins. The doctrine of it works. Harold's belt joined that secret literature, the catalogue of fixes that never made it into history because they made history possible. On the far side of the ridge, a German crew waited for the counterattack that never came. Their gun had the precision of a violin and the temperament to match. It demanded a world without dust and without haste. It was a masterpiece, and masterpieces are fragile. They never saw the belt that refused to jam. They saw only the consequences, a Sherman that did not pause when it should have, that did not present the mercy of failure. Later, when they found the burned-out hull, they might have spotted the odd hinge, the foreign spring, the file marks that did not match Detroit. They might have shrugged. They might have said, American abundance. They would have been half right. The other half was American permission, the permission to be ugly in the service of efficiency, the permission to improve the sacred with the practical, the permission to offend standards to save lives. After the war, the logic of the unjammable spread the way good ideas do, outward, quietly, into factory lines where conveyor belts learned to flex under misalignment rather than stop, into print presses that recovered from slips without tearing miles of paper, into data centers where servers rerouted around packet loss instead of crashing. The idea is the same across centuries and industries. Give the system a hinge at the point where it used to have a fracture. Turn failure into articulation. Let the machine admit the world is rough and move anyway. There are patents that cite this philosophy without knowing they do. There are algorithms that embody it without saying so. They are all descendants of a belt that worked because a man refused to accept that good enough was good enough to die for. Harold went back to Illinois and to tractors that coughed and shook but learned, under his hands, to keep going. He married, repaired, raised children who thought their father smelled permanently of oil and winter. Once a reporter found him, asked about the ridge, about the belt, about the day an improvised hinge held back a professional collapse. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered the way only mechanics can, with a sentence that sounds like humility and is really a thesis for civilization. It just needed to work. Then he slid back under the truck, and the sentence ended with the click of a wrench. In archives, the battle report still reads like a ledger. Enemy guns neutralized, position held. Friendly losses acceptable. Contributing factor improved feed reliability observed. No name, no lamp, no pocket knife. But out in the living world, in factories, in hospitals, in code repositories, in midnight workshops where a single bulb burns above a problem that refuses to behave, the belt that wouldn't break is everywhere. Every time a designer makes a path for error to travel without destroying the system, every time a technician adds a shim where a spec demanded a seam, every time a line worker saves a shift with a trick learned from a grandfather, Harold's hinge clicks again. Progress is rarely symmetrical. It's born crooked, from ideas bent under pressure, from men and women who don't ask if something can be done, but how fast. Perfection is a luxury. Movement is survival. And nowhere is that truer than in war, where the geometry of improvisation defines who lives long enough to tell the story. Engineers dream in straight lines. But the battlefield rewrites every equation in mud. Mud doesn't care about tolerances. Coal doesn't respect calculations. Reality is a constant act of vandalism against design. Harold Jennings understood this better than anyone. He didn't fight the world's irregularities. He designed with them. His belt worked not because it defied chaos, but because it included it. Each hinge, each loop, each filed edge carried a little forgiveness. The system was free to fail in small ways, so it never failed completely. That was his secret, not precision, but mercy. The same principle that later guided suspension bridges, fault-tolerant software, and spaceflight, that if perfection breaks, resilience bends. Decades later, at a factory in Michigan, a young engineer studying conveyor lines ran into a recurring problem. When belts jammed, production stopped. When tension loosened, output dropped. No one could find the balance. Then he stumbled on an old technical note, a scanned field report from 1945, barely legible. In the margin, someone had written, "Allow play" in links. System recovers itself. He adjusted the design, gave the conveyor a little room to breathe. It worked. He didn't know he was quoting Harold Jennings. But progress doesn't care who remembers, only that someone listens. Every mechanic knows the hierarchy of miracles. If it moves, it can be fixed. If it can't be fixed, it can be bypassed. And if it can't be bypassed, it can be reimagined. That's where Harold lived, at the thin edge of reimagination, where constraint becomes invitation. He didn't think of it as innovation. He thought of it as common sense, the oldest kind of intelligence on Earth. But common sense under pressure becomes something higher, a quiet form of genius. It's what welders did when they patched bridges in Korea with tank armor. It's what Apollo engineers did when they turned CO filior filters sideways to fit a square socket in a round hole. It's what a young technician still does today when she splices wires with the wrong connectors because waiting for the right ones costs lives. Improvisation is not the opposite of order. It's the final proof that order still matters enough to be saved. In the decades that followed, military academies taught logistics as a science. Factories turned it into a flowchart. Corporations branded it as optimization. But at its heart, logistics is something simpler. A belief that motion once started must not stop. Harold's belt embodied that creed. It was neither fast nor pretty. It was faithful. And faith, in the language of machines, means reliability under doubt. The entire post-war century was built on that faith. Assembly lines, data centers, even the internet itself. Systems designed to route around failure rather than prevent it. In that sense, every byte that reaches you, every packet that finds its way home through storms of interference, is a tiny echo of the belt that refused to jam. The same logic connects them. Don't freeze, reroute. Don't break, bend, don't wait, adapt. No one patented Harold's design. No one could. There were no schematics, no signatures, no glory. The improvement entered the bloodstream of industry anonymously, like oxygen in a body that doesn't need to know the name of the lung. Somewhere in a tank museum, a curator points to the belt and says, "This one was an unofficial field mod. See how the hinge tapers." Visitors nod politely, then move on to the turret, the armor, the power. The little thing that saved it all remains unseen, just as Harold would have wanted. We think of progress as acceleration, faster, sleeker, smarter, but the truest kind is durable. It survives its inventors. Every bridge that flexes in the wind instead of cracking, every airplane wing that warps slightly before finding its lift again, every algorithm that corrects its own error without restarting, all of them follow the belt's law: build for failure, not against it. It's the reason a Mars rover can drive through storms for years. It's the reason a nuclear plant can shut itself down safely. It's the reason our civilization, imperfect as it is, still hums through its crises. Harold would never have called that philosophy. He'd have called it making sure it works. Same thing. In 1965, 2 engineers at a Midwest defense plant ran stress tests on a newly standardized feed system. At maximum fire rate, the belt glowed red but did not seize. One of them wrote in the margin of his report, "The field boys solved this one before we did." That line was underlined in blue ink, circled and preserved in the archive. A small acknowledgement. A footnote to ingenuity. History forgot the man. Engineering remembered the lesson. Close your eyes in a modern factory and you'll hear it. The hum of belts, gears, and wheels. The steady percussion of motion that never quite rests. It's the same sound Harold heard in France, the same rhythm he fought to protect, motion refusing to yield to interruption. Every hinge that turns, every conveyor that flows, every heartbeat of modern progress belongs, in a small way, to the man who refused to let his machine go silent. Because progress, when stripped to its core, is nothing more than this: something must keep moving. When historians talk about the Second World War, they talk about scale, the 1,000,000 tons of steel, the fleets, the nations that moved like machinery. They speak of strategy, ideology, destiny. But history, when you get close to it, isn't made of strategy. It's made of small rhythms, the click of a wrench, the hum of an engine, the sound of something working when it shouldn't, the sound of motion refusing to die. Harold's belt was never photographed in action. No war correspondent wrote about it. No general mentioned it in his report. But every soldier who came home from that ridge carried its consequence. They didn't know it, but they had witnessed a principle being born, that a machine's purpose is not perfection, but persistence. A factory worker once said, "You don't fight a war with miracles. You fight it with things that keep working." That's what Harold built, a thing that kept working. And that made all the difference. Every act of innovation begins as disobedience, a refusal to accept that good enough is good enough. Harold's disobedience was mechanical, but its echo was moral. He risked punishment to make something better. He risked failure to keep others alive. When the official manuals caught up years later, they still didn't write his name. But his idea had already gone viral, not through papers or patents, but through hands, habits, instincts. It spread through every workshop, every barracks, every mind that learned the quiet courage of fixing something without permission. After the war, America entered an age of abundance. Factories flooded the world with products too cheap to fix. The art of repair began to fade, replaced by the convenience of replacement. But somewhere in the corners of that new prosperity, men like Harold kept the old faith alive. They taught their children that a thing worth building is a thing worth maintaining. They taught apprentices to listen for the early warning that whisper before the failure. And as the digital age began, that instinct migrated from machines of metal to machines of code. Today, a systems engineer debugging a crash at midnight, a drone technician rewriting a control loop mid-flight, a startup founder soldering her first prototype, all of them are speaking the same ancient dialect. Keep it alive. Across time, the same story repeats. A mechanic under a lamp, an engineer in a lab, a programmer at a screen. Each hears the same silent plea from the world they're trying to build. Don't let me stop. That's the thread that runs from the Shermans on the ridge to the Mars rovers on the Red Plains, from Harold's belt to the Internet's backbone, from the sound of gears to the whisper of algorithms. It's not the noise of victory, it's the rhythm of endurance. When you look at the great monuments of progress, the rockets, the factories, the supercomputers, you can miss the truth that every miracle is built on maintenance, that the heroic is hidden inside the habitual, that the people who keep the world from breaking rarely get remembered. In every century, someone like Harold stands at the edge of failure and says, quietly, it just needs to work. That sentence is not modesty. It's civilization condensed. Because if everything stops, that sentence is all we have left. Decades later, in a small county museum in Illinois, a restored Sherman tank sits under a skylight. Its paint is bright, its tracks clean, its gun forever pointed at a horizon that no longer fires back. Most visitors walk past it quickly. It's just another exhibit, a reminder of a war that ended before they were born. But sometimes when the air is still and the sun hits the armor just right, you can see it. A faint line of weld marks along the feed assembly, a shape that doesn't quite match the blueprints. That's Harold's fingerprint. It's what history looks like when it's not trying to be beautiful. Progress is not invention, it's endurance. It's the long, quiet refusal to accept that failure must be final. It's the lamp still burning at midnight, the belt still turning after the battle, the idea that even in ruin, something can still move forward. Every civilization builds monuments to its victories. But its true legacy is in the things that didn't break: a hinge, a spring, a belt that refused to stop feeding. That's where history really lives, in the friction that was overcome, in the rhythm that never stopped.